Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Changing the Tide. Today I'm super stoked to have 8-Bit on. 8-Bit, welcome to the show.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Thank you so much.
Yes, we've got a lot to talk about today, including your latest project, some of the work you've done in the past that is on lop.net, a little 10 emails over 10 days primer on Bitcoin. And the project that you are working on is actually something that I think is close to the genesis of Bitcoin, and that is email. So we'll dive in there as well. One Moody dashboard, we are starting at block height 719,532, and there are currently 14,987 Bitcoin nodes that at least can be reached, and 52% of those are running over Tor. And then there are, uh, it looks like 18,845 Lightning Network nodes, and there are 3,331 and almost a half Bitcoin locked up into the Lightning Network. Incredible stuff. Bitcoin and Lightning is going to be big on your project, 8-Bit. So why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
Oh man, where do we start? So I am, yeah, I'm an, this is a really interesting question, and I'm sorry if I fumble kind of through a lot of this. There's a lot that has changed in the last year. I think for a lot of folks, but I think especially for me, the one of which just to kind of level set is I opted to go full NIM, full pseudonymous kind of identity starting last year, and I've worked really hard to remove as much as I can from the internet about my kind of proper name, and so, but I'm still uh, learning how to operate in this way. And so, what's interesting, John, is that like before it was very easy to provide evidence for who I was. I had this longstanding blog which had existed for almost 20 years. I'd written every day, and so I'd created this massive brand, and an about page and a CV, and now none of that exists. And so to be honest, it's kind of it's a little bit it's been a little bit hard to try to figure out, like, how do exactly do I share my identity in a way that respects the person that I'm engaging with, because I want them to have as much of a picture and insight into who I am as a person, while at the same time protecting myself and my family from surface area, reducing surface area for identity theft and attacks for what I believe is going to be even more difficult in the coming years. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I think for a lot of folks who are listening to this, they get that, they see that. Um, and so all that to say, when you ask me, like, what is your story, there's a real hesitancy to,
Yeah.
to kind of like tie myself to a narrative that is true, but that would also increase surface area for attack. So, that's a long kind of preamble to, I'm a software engineer. I've been working in the industry for over 20 years, in building software and products, as an entrepreneur for the last decade. Built a number of companies, small and large, raised venture capital, had a major exit, sold one to a Fortune 500. So, and then I've had a really interesting uh, indie app career, whereas I'm a Mac developer. I had a small app that won Best App of the Year a couple of years in a row. So, like, I've done so many different things. I've had such a winding career. I've worked in for-profit, nonprofit, and I've had an incredible life. I'm so grateful.
That's pretty awesome. And I think you bring up a really important point. Even this morning, I was listening to the most recent episode of Citadel Dispatch, which was all about Bitcoin companies gathering information on.
Like twice. That
Yeah,
was hardcore.
it was. But I think you're talking about an area like you just mentioned where Bitcoiners more and more increasingly, and even myself having this video live on my own channel and tying my identity to an actual regarding Bitcoin, I have opened myself up to an attack surface, and so I'm wrestling with that myself. Um, and it sounds like for you, you went through the wrestling phase and have taken steps to reduce that surface area.
And this is by no means to pressure to prescribe anything for you or for obviously the listeners, but I think as each of us kind of walk through our own personal journey of how we engage with Bitcoin and how it really does fundamentally change the way that we think about ourselves and our life and the way that we behave and the way that we save and spend, obviously. But it also begins to really challenge the way that you think about how you relate to others and how you relate to others in a way that makes economic sense. And and what I mean by economic is not just financial, that's the more obvious one, but in terms of just the economy of time and how much time we spend essentially wasting that time, that economy of sorts, in a way that isn't fruitful for either party. And it began to dawn on me that it starts with your identity. And just think about how much time you might spend Googling someone's dossier before you might meet them, right? And whether that's, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or bad thing, but it is a thing. And you just say, you might spend an hour. I know that I have, because I'm very anxious to meet people and I want to know as much as I can about them. So I might spend, oh God, I can't believe I'm admitting this. I might spend days researching someone and their background. I mean, honestly, you got a taste of that, John. I listened to every single podcast, like 3 days straight, right? Because I wanted to know and that's just my personality. I just want to know everything about who you are as much as I can tell. And the fact that I would go as far as spend a couple of days listening to every episode, reading everything that you've ever written as far as I could tell, just to get it, like, that's an unbelievable investment of my time and my life.
Thank you for
And
that.
yeah, and it's been fun. I mean, oh my God, I've learned so many great things. It's been so cool. But Bitcoin challenges you to do is to go all the way down to that fundamental economic point of time. It's like every second, every minute, every hour that you spend doing something, whatever that is a choice. And there's an upside and downside to it. And it starts with your identity. It starts with how much you have online. And in a way, you're in fact serving other people. This is really counterintuitive, John, but in a way, you're serving other people by not surfacing your entire life for them. And in a way, you're saying, like, trust me, the real thing is better. And just like, let's wait until we can get on a Zoom call or get on a real person, right? And hang out and let me break bread with you. Like, there's something very intimate and where that's really the first major encounter. And so I don't know, it really, Bitcoin, as they say, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And it has definitely changed me.
There's a bit of mystery that is lost when you spend that amount of time figuring things out about people before you ever actually spend significant time face to face with them, isn't there?
There's this really, and now it's almost like, because so many of us spent the last 10, if not 20 years learning to interface in that new way, we have lost a little bit of our ability to relate to others, kind of in more normal times. I was at a meetup for the first time in over 2.5 years, like just Monday. I mean, this is so recent. I'm shaking thinking about it because it was so weird to be around other humans. Now I'm fairly socially awkward anyway, so I try not to do much of that. But like, it was just so, like, I'd forgotten like every modicum of natural behavior in this like organized setting. It was awesome. It was a Bit Devs meetup, and other Bitcoiners. It was awesome. It was so fucking awesome. I loved it. But it was just, and because I didn't know, and I intentionally decided not to Google every single person in the meetup group. I was a well-behaved attendee. It was so refreshing just to encounter someone for the first time, not knowing anything about them. And I know that might sound so elementary to a lot of the folks who are listening. That's just like, God, John, like this your guest is so weird. Like, but I don't know. I feel like, that's why I'm so excited about 2022 and this year. Is I think we're kind of going to come back to something that's so much more natural and something so much more rich. And It's not surprising that Bitcoin is part of that story for me.
Yeah, because over the past couple years, in a lot of jurisdictions, people have been forced to interact digitally only in a lot of ways. I think there's a dehumanizing aspect to that as well.
For sure. I think we all have in our own way lost something. And if you actually, when you really sit down, it's very sobering. And I don't, and I don't bring this up to make anyone feel bad, but like really just sit and think what you've really accomplished over the last couple of years. Now, some of us have been very productive. you know, like for those who really love kind of our own space and time, it's like, oh, this has been heavenly. But for a lot of folks, like you come up empty. You've done most things just to essentially survive. And when you're spending most of your time to just survive, your productivity is usually that's the downside, is you have not been as productive as you could have been because you've been spending most of your time just trying to get your basic needs settled, at least your emotional and psychological needs, but then medical needs, all these restrictions and mandates, and it's just like that. Wow, I try to get 40 hours of coding in, but now I get 5. It's just like something happened, something changed.
Yeah, and what's interesting there is when it comes to the safety, or at least emotional needs and psychological needs covered, it reminds me a lot of my time. I spent a portion of my life right out of college in some inner city low income schools, schools that were made primarily of students from low income backgrounds is how I should put it. And I saw that every day. People who were struggling just to get the basic needs met, to the point that being able to be productive and intake anything at school was tough, and required, you almost had to teach them how to go beyond that and be available for things beyond, okay, I feel safe here now. And now we can get to the learning.
That's right.
You
That's
know,
right. That's why I cannot wait for the Renaissance, the new second Renaissance, or whatever you want to call it, for when Bitcoin really does become a much larger part of our society. Because what it has done for me and for so many of my friends and folks in the larger Bitcoiner community is it has given us, not just given us back our time, we can save it. And as a consequence, you can spend more time in the present. This is what's so like fucking amazing about it, is you could store your mechanical energy into a thermodynamic source, a hash, right? That you can store for forever, and it gives you incredible peace of mind, which allows you to be creative. It allows you to do your best work, and what and to do your best work, you need time. You need time to literally just sit there as a creative person, as an artist. I think all of us are artists in our own way, and to bring forth the fruits of that artistry. The problem is our best work requires a long time to bake. It requires a long time for us to just do nothing, to think about it, to meditate about it, to pray about it. Oftentimes, the most important things require inaction, a large amount of investment of inaction before action. And if you cannot save your time through economics, you cannot be creative. You cannot ultimately fulfill, the larger purpose, I believe. So this Bitcoin in so many ways has been, salvation, and that's a very strong word, but it has been a savings mechanism in so many different facets, not just economics. So I'm so grateful for it. And as more folks, as you said, as more folks get into this, they're going to be able to go beyond just their basic necessities. And I think just what it will be an incredible gift to the world.
I'm excited for that Renaissance too. And you just said something that I want to go back to make sure and let you unpack, because you said 2022 is a year, where a lot of things are going to change, and it's no surprise that Bitcoin is part of that. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Is this Renaissance, or did you have other things in mind? 8-bit.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I just think as the technological medium, see, here's the great thing about Bitcoin. It humbles you. It really it forces you to remove most, if not all, your ego, because you realize that. I mean, intellectually, just every time I think upon the Bitcoin project as a piece of code, as an organism, I think, oh my God, like there's just no way that I could ever really create something as uniquely uh, unique as that, as creative, as impactful as that. Wow. My goal now is just to attach myself in a meaningful way to this larger story, and but I no longer have to, like, create the next big thing. I can kind of not lower my standards insofar, but in a way it relieves the pressure to be super creative. I think of, there's something in each one of us that wants to be attached to a larger story, a larger narrative, to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And I feel like professionally I've been looking for those types of industries and niches and marketplaces and whatever. I think there's a lot of analogies to religion and to the church. Just attaching yourself to a larger meta narrative is very important, I think. But for a lot of professionals, we miss that. Bitcoin is this really interesting exit ramp for a lot of folks professionally, where they finally get to align something they really fall in love with, and they realize there's an economy that needs to be developed and built and architected. And so we have this really unique opportunity, especially now. And I really want to encourage, if this is the only thing that the folks who listen to this remember, it's this single thing that 8-Bit said: now's the time to fucking build. Like, if you want to do something incredibly meaningful with your life, if you want to attach yourself to a rocket ship, like, now's the time. Like, it's like the single most important message I think of 2022 is build, 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 build. Like, there is a new economy coming. It's already here. It's not equally distributed. If you want a larger chunk of the pie, if you want to build like more, if you want a bigger bags for, as you stack your sats, like, do something useful for the Bitcoin economy. And that's essentially why I do what I do.
Yeah, so let's dive into it. You had one project that you were working on up until just a couple weeks ago, and then did a hard pivot. Would you like to maybe explain kind of the history of this
Oh yeah.
project?
Yeah. This is such, like, and I really appreciate you inviting me on, because, like, this is the first really public conversation I've had about this project. And honestly, I'm going to be referring a ton of people back to this, because I'll just say, hey, if you want to know the story of, like, this project, like, just go Chaining the Tide. Like, they have that. And so, like,
That's awesome.
yeah, I'm gonna really use it as kind of a cornerstone piece. But this project, Bitcoin Email, really started in the summer of 2017. Now, my Bitcoin story starts before that. In 2015, in May, I bought it for $240.04. I bought 4 of them for just south of $1,000. Then I panic sold them a few months later. Like, classic story. So I don't want to, like, start there. That's good. But more importantly, like, in 2017, I decided to start building for this economy, and I started a small company and kind of technology startup. We bootstrapped it for a while, me and my small team. It was actually my brother, and we raised some money. We raised a couple $1 million in traditional VC. We did 2 or 3 major pieces of software. We pivoted like 2 or twice. I did a major restart. I mean, we've just continually failed as we watch this incredible industry grow. And that's very typical. Like, most startups fail. And so we burned through that capital, and then I bought the company back. Last year, I decided, you know what, I was out of money anyway, but I realized that it dawned on me that to really do this right would really require me to exit that particular financial scenario. And this was before, like, all of Jack's, crazy anti-VC, like, rhetoric around Web3 and stuff. So I timed this really nicely, actually. I feel like really grateful to be out of that. But I was able to get all the IP and the ownership of the company back. Started working, kind of bootstrapping it again, and then realized I had essentially built email, because what I built was a community and communication tool which I was starting to integrate Bitcoin into it. And it was a community platform, and folks could register very quickly and communicate freely and pass value through simple wallets. But I had designed it as a community system first, and then kind of a commerce tool second. But I realized that the primitives should have been swapped. And so, to make a very long story short, I decided a couple of weeks ago, like, now's the time. Like, I've lived the Bitcoin standard. I live on the Bitcoin standard with my family. Like, it's time to really go hardcore. Let's have a fresh code base, and let's go build this product from the ground up. So
Wow.
Yes. So these are early days. Today is like it's like day 0 plus 6 or 7. So it's barely over a week. I'm building it in a way that's very, I wouldn't say unique. I'm not the first person to do this, but I'm really trying to every day capture a little bit of the effort, kind of essentially a visual proof of work, a Twitter proof of work, where I can just say, here's what I'm working on in community. Here's the progress that I'm making against the code base. Here are some designs, and just really kind of building in public as much as I can, because I want them to see, not to prove that this is a lot of work. I think folks understand that, but to show that like this matters, and that there's an opportunity for you to be a part of the larger story, just like what Bitcoin invites us to do. That's just like, what world religions challenge us to do. Is there's something larger here. And there's an opportunity to really impart your wisdom, because one of the coolest things about Bitcoiners is they're some of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And I mean, super freaking like smart people. And it's because there's this very unique obsession tied with incredible visceral emotional ties, because this is your literal livelihood, right? So you can only be so much excited about a basketball team or a professional sports team, right? But it's so much different when you're fighting for your own economics, when you're fighting for your own wealth and your own financial system. Like you feel so deeply. I mean, I don't have to explain that. People get that. So that's what I wanted to do. If I could uniquely use crypto Twitter, or Bitcoin Twitter rather, use Twitter community spaces, which it's kind of working, and provide this look into the process. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if that particular part will work, but I do know that what I'm trying to do, which is enable the sending and receiving of Bitcoin as easy as an email. That conceit, I would love to see if I can figure that out. So essentially, 8-bit at btc.email could email, quote unquote, email Jon at, Jon, or, changing the tide at btc.email, and it would obfuscate your wallet address. So I wouldn't have to remember, a 24-digit alphanumeric. I just remember, Jon Crabtree, or, rising, changing the tide. And so it just really simplifies this. It's kind of like what I was describing to someone else the other day. It's kind of like memorizing phone numbers, or memorizing, at this point, Twitter handles. It's just, you just know it's like at 8-bit, and we should be able to send and receive value as simple as that. So that's the idea.
That's amazing. So you said day 0 plus 6 or 7, which puts you just about. I actually found an email from 1/16/2009, and it's from the cryptography mailing list. And Dustin D. Trammell and Satoshi Nakamoto are writing to each other.
Very famous.
It's very famous because the famous part is, it might make sense just to get some in case it catches on. If enough people think the same way, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once it gets bootstrapped, there are so many applications. If you could effortlessly pay a few cents to a website as easily as dropping coins in a vending machine. That's the popular. What's maybe not so popular is just a couple lines above. It can already be used for pay to send email. The send dialog is resizable, and you can enter as long of a message as you like. It's sent directly when it connects. The recipient double clicks on the message. If someone famous is getting more email than they can read, but would still like to have a way for fans to contact them, they could set up Bitcoin, give out the IP address on their website, quote, send X Bitcoins to my priority hotline at this IP, and I'll read the message. Quote. So it's slightly different what you're describing, but it's very interesting that email very early in the game. I mean, this is just a couple weeks
Oh, that
after
was,
the
oh
client
my
was
God.
released.
Oh, I'm so glad that you mentioned. I mean, that was literally inspiration. In fact, if not the product design art, like essentially the fundamental product design. It's just, I have looked and stared and reread that particular paragraph and the one before it and the one after it about subscriptions. And I have just, I must have read it 1,000 times, quite literally. In fact, it's a dedicated tab on my browser. I just go back and I said, wow, like this person saw the future, or these people, Satoshi, whoever he, she, they were, they saw the
Right.
future, and it just so happens that the technology, at least the surrounding infrastructure, but more importantly, the cultural know-how wasn't quite ready. And now with our tooling, our open source projects, in terms of where the maturity is of the project, we can now do some of this stuff. So the pay to send email, we can totally do that. Not only can we create a spam-free email client and architecture, we can create a system where there is really a deep and abiding fundamental connection and respect between the sender and the receiver. And that's what was missing economically and technologically from the previous generations of more is there wasn't an alignment, an economic alignment between the sender and receiver. Like the biggest and more obvious example is spam. Is in current web clients and email clients, there is no cost to malice, is what we call it. And essentially, there's no essential cost of spinning up a web server and sending out 1 billion spam and spoofing and phishing emails to a billion people today. It might cost me $5. Like I could, easily do that on a cloud computing device. There's no cost to it. There's no downside. And if I get one, old person, old grandma to commit their credit card information, their IP, social security number, like boom, jackpot for the $5 server. I might have got
ROI.
liquidated. Right, I might liquidated their entire life savings. Great return investment, no cost to malice. And that's because the monetization, the economic layer of email is where you are the product rather than just a pay for service or value for value, which is what we know to be the more natural kind of free market economic, Austrian economic model. Right now, in our current scenario, we are the product, and we are served advertisements, and our data is monetized to the hilt. Like, it's completely barbaric, and it's terrible. Everyone knows. I don't have to harp on that. What Bitcoin allows, and by flipping it on its head, at least the way that conceptually I thought about designing it, is it makes the economics first and the messaging second. And because the economics always has to come first, because before you say yes, right, I need to buy your time. And so now, what we can do now with Bitcoin is we can say that economic layer comes first, and we can create a way where someone can pay to have access for your time, and you have no obligation to read it, but you will also be paid regardless. So imagine a world where, Jon, Jon at, BTC.email, you can create a small landing page, which is what they were talking about, an IP, is quote unquote hot priority hotline. But you could say, hey, anyone can email me outside of network, and it's going to be 100 sats. And the moment you send that email to me, if you're in network or out, you have to pay. You have to pay for the privilege of my time, which is precisely the way it should be. And when you wake up the next morning, you would jump in the inbox just like and everyone do, and you would have free email from in network, and then there's a view where it shows you paid email. And you might see 100 emails there, or you might see a total of 5,000 sats. This is what's so amazing about it. You have no obligation to read those. You could delete them, but still collect the 5,000 sats because you've decided, as the bearer of that value, to distribute it back, to give it back. But you don't have to. And that's where we have now a truly aligned economical incentive. There is a cost to malice because someone in this future network where Bitcoin is the fundamental layer, they would become poor very quickly. If it costs even 1 or 2 or 3 sats per email, very quickly, like they're out of money. So there is a real cost to malice. So I'm excited that I'm able to take a really very simple concept Satoshi and the original squad had concepted, and using some more modern technology, be able to combine that into, I believe, an interface that makes sense. And I'm betting that we can do it, and I'm very excited to try.
Because you mentioned more modern methods. I mean, this was 6 or 7 years before the Lightning Network paper. There was no Lightning Network, in probably in a way there didn't need to be because of scale. The scale
That's
out of the
right.
gate with Bitcoin was not an issue. It became an issue later when more and more people onboarded. But now we have a bigger user base of Bitcoin. It's worth more, and Lightning Network has helped on the scalability side. It sounds like you have plans to potentially integrate in Lightning Network too.
Yes, I mean, the idea here is that it will be compatible, with Bitcoin and Lightning. So, and if I can design in a way where, regardless of what address, it just automatically and programmatically goes to the right address. This is what's so cool. Imagine, 8-bit at btc.email, which essentially represents an n number of addresses. We could do a billion addresses, and we could also auto-generate and randomize them. So in terms of adding layers of additional privacy, which is a big deal for Bitcoiners, like imagine being able to email 8-bit, at btc.email, and it could go to one of 10,000 different addresses that I've programmatically assigned. Hey, if it comes from John, from Changing the Tide, go to this address. If it comes from my dad, go to this address. If it goes to, it comes from my mom, it goes to my, my kid's 529. We could programmatically distribute funds without ever revealing the pathways, right? Because you don't need to know where that money goes. But all you have to do as a sender is remember one single address. Hey, I'm just going to send 8-bit money, and it's at 8-bit, right? And so we can do all this really cool stuff that really helps provide simplicity for the user side, but then these complex, sophisticated routing, which we can do with Lightning in a number of different ways. So there's so many different things that we can do, but the most important thing is zero spam. It's a private network, it's secure, and perhaps most importantly, that you're working with other Bitcoin. Because when you see another Bitcoiner, you're just like, dude, you're a pleb. Like we're together. And so that's what I'm really excited. I've got a couple friends and family. We send and receive value all the time, and I honestly just got tired copy pasta addresses. And it's like, oh god, you look at 1,000 times to make sure if it's right. It's just like, God, and I'm a professional at this point, but I'm like, well, I send, XYZ person every 2 weeks. Like, there's no reason I couldn't have a simple, canonical, memorable, address essentially for a bunch of their different addresses that they want me to send stuff to for whatever reason. Why can't we program that? And it just dawned on me that I was not only working around that area already, but that this was a real opportunity.
That's pretty incredible. So in your mind, you're thinking, let's prevent address reuse, because even early on, Satoshi mentioned that best privacy practice is not to reuse addresses. We know that as Bitcoiners.
Yes.
And so you're building that in.
Imagine if every single time, not every email, because maybe not every email necessarily has to send value, but every time you do send value, it's automatically generates a new address, wallet address, never before used wallet address, so it has a clean record. Just a level of pristine privacy that we can provide technology is it really important. And I think forward-thinking folks, and there are a lot of them in the space, are already beginning to work through these. Like, how can we provide even more layers of privacy and protection for Bitcoiners, for transactions, forwards facing, backwards facing. I'm really excited because I'm kind of like middle layer smart, but there are some really smart people in the space.
I first, to that point, I first came across, you were talking about the project prior, and you were Bitcoin focused specifically because I forget exactly what the tweet was, but something along the lines of how there was still better privacy on the Bitcoin network when it came to communications than, say, Lightning Network. Um, did I read that wrong, or do you want
Well,
to expound on that?
yeah, and I don't necessarily want to go too technical. There are some people who've really noticed their shit a lot better than I might, but essentially, from what I've gathered so far, is like it's a fundamental trade-off, right? So there's privacy in terms of the sender, but the receiver, uh, I mean then that node operator can effectively see everything. And so like the question becomes, if you're in someone's pool, or is, do I trust the person who's operating it? And like, you may not know the person, you may not trust that person, and there's no reason essentially stopping it from pooling value, or rug pulling in a programmatic way. And I think, and I want to be very delicate, I really like Lightning, but I don't think it's ready for prime time. And I might get skewered for that, but I think that's okay, because I think a lot of folks tout the benefits of Lightning, and there are many. But I think we need some folks who are speaking a little bit more brightly, perhaps, about the downsides. Well, in every technological equation, there's always a very nice upside and a very non-obvious downside. And the non-obvious is that there is some centralization as a result of speed, and you just have to do a cost benefit kind of analysis for yourself. I think in a hyper Bitcoinized world, this might sound really weird to a lot of folks. You might not even need Lightning. That might spook a lot of people, but I don't know. I just think there are going to be some interesting uses of other off ramps and on ramps. Stable coins, that's a very interesting topic. I don't know if we can stop that. I would love that we can, but I think that's going to happen. Like, there's so many interesting things. So the point of me saying all of that is, as a software engineer, as an architect, as a product designer, and in terms of security and protection for our community users, I want to stick to core first. I want to make sure that works really well, because that's proven. It's been unhackable, like in terms of the Bitcoin network, for 13 straight years. Like, that's very trustworthy. Lightning at scale, it's still very much experimental. And I just want to personally, I've done experiments on testnet, but personally, I don't have large sets of value in pools in Lightning. I'm not comfortable with it yet. I'm super conservative with my tech.
This actually takes me back to a couple things. I had NVK, one of the co-founders of CoinKite, on several episodes
I like
ago.
that guy.
He's great. Well, in what you're describing reminds me, so far as I can tell, there's nothing that their devices interface. There's no device that they've created that interfaces yet with Lightning. Now it can secondarily, right? But that's an interesting point. And to that end, they just announced something today, card. And so
Oh my
very
gosh,
much
that looks
along
really cool. Yeah,
doesn't that look
NFC.
amazing?
Oh man, I mean, it just looks
Well,
sexy as hell. But
yeah,
that guy in particular, I think, is really what I am very encouraged. He's a real entrepreneur. He's a real builder. He's a real creator. Because that guy gets it. He may not put it in these words, but he sees the future. He
yeah,
understands that the literal base layer and the business infrastructure for the new coming economy that is Bitcoin has yet to be built. So the fact that he's going kind of wide with a number of different products is so fucking strategic, because you don't have to win a category war in any of those when a new market is being built. You just need to be top 5, top 10, top 100. But if you've got 10 or a dozen products in the space, you've got a billion-dollar company, a business, like a portfolio of businesses. So I follow him, not necessarily because I have all his products. I do have some, but more of just like he is constantly thinking of new ways to build new things that the Bitcoiners need, and that's inspiring. So really, kind of hats off to him and the team.
yeah. His other co-founder, Doc Hex, kind of NVK humble. He's like, I'm the shitty coder, and Doc Hex makes all that. But what's fascinating is probably part of the reason you're a big fan is you guys are both artists. Like his field of study was art, and I think there's something there to the creative process. Art is not. There's no one answer that you can arrive at in any of the arts. You know, it's actually focused on the process, which is probably a conversation in and of itself. But when it comes to Bitcoin, uh, it's deep and wide as a field of study, and so you can go either way. You can go really deep in
Oh
one
man,
area, or you can go really wide across
I've,
a multitude.
I, yeah, I have a, oh my God, like the implications, the applications of Bitcoin are just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. I've talked to, I'm an educator at heart. I have a master's in education from Dallas Seminary. And one of the, and just so education is just such an important part of my history. And I just love teaching and giving kind of away with folks I know. But I've thought and shared this idea with so many different folks where it's like, if you could have a single curriculum of Bitcoin, you would touch physics, chemistry, psychology, sociology, obviously economics and history, engineering, hardware and software, like quantum, like like you would, and the singular topic is Bitcoin. But it would, and so as you explore that thing, this anomaly, it would force you to learn this entire world, literature, art, design, like product design, like it's just a supply chain, like because the moment you start moving into mining, the mining component, and you would break it down into three kind of major parts, like as again as an educator, I've developed many kind of instructional courses or pedagogical architect systems. So you break it down to the three security models, or the way that the three essentially major buckets of how we secure the network work, which is one, you start with miners, or maybe you start with miners last, but it's the hodlers, the buyers, right? It's the buyers of last resort. Those people holding the value, holding economic value, right? In
Yeah,
addition to the node validators, right? They have a very, and then the miners, and you have this triangle, this trifecta, this Trinitarian model, where the three of these independent yet interdependent kind of species preserve, validate, and create value for the network. And each one has like 5 or 6 different major areas of research. And that could be, you could spend 20 years studying it. I mean, I know I've spent the last 5 or 6, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface, but I think you could make an incredible educational curricula around the single topic of Bitcoin.
one of the first public writings I did on Bitcoin, I took a great books course at my college, and so starting from the pre-Greeks all the way to and all the literature and philosophy in between. But what was so interesting, you mentioned the three, the trifecta, the triangle, and what I found so fascinating is that from Plato on one end of the spectrum, the Republic is all about putting people in specific places that they are born into. There was the philosopher kings. I think they were the guardians called, and then there was kind of the, for lack of a better word, plebs, and kind of that. Uh, but then, in the whole idea is that the town is greater than the individual, right? The community is more important than the individual, and then you get all the way to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who turns it on his head and says specifically in one of his works that the individual is greater than the town. What's so fascinating with Bitcoin in that trifecta is that it bridges those two ends of the spectrum, where like the individual is sovereign and important because they can choose to leave the network when they want, they can choose to rejoin. Satoshi says it in his white paper. But once they do join, there are specific things depending on which avenue they enter in from that they have to follow. And not only do they have to follow, there's a benefit that's brought to the network by doing so. And so I just thought that was so powerful about Bitcoin.
But let's take that even farther, John, because Bitcoin deserves serious inquisition. Like, so yes, totally. And for the first time ever, it kind of aligns these incentive systems in a way that's egalitarian in a very kind of nuanced way. But let's take this a little bit further. It's better than that. You can exit and enter the community without cost to your personhood, or to your identity, to your economic status, and to your community place. It is the first time where you could leave for whatever reason. You don't have to ever justify, not connecting your node. You don't ever have to tell anyone. You can disappear, and the full weight and glory and respect of you being a Bitcoiner. We just haven't seen your node in a while, right? You can come back anytime, and you have a rightful place with us. And that is a innovation that, at least a cultural innovation that not many folks have thought about, because usually there is a cost associated with you not being with us. We haven't seen you in a while. Oh, where have you been? Right? And there's this there's this really interesting hit against you. There's a cost analysis, and that's been one of the biggest struggles for me as a kind of personally speaking is I'm just very socially awkward. So I might disappear for months, if not years, from folks that I've known, friends, and for people who know me at this point in my life, like they get it. They get that I just literally might disappear from the face of the planet and then show up 18 months or a couple of years later, be like, yeah, we're best friends. But for me, what's been difficult is I'm like on the spectrum, so there's some of that, but there's always been I've always been shocked, because I have felt like, why can't I re-enter into this relationship as if without having to explain myself? Why can't we just why can't you just meet me where I'm at and just love me, and not have to justify my disappearance or whatever? And it just doesn't exist in most communities. I think there are some communities that are open to that type of behavior, but it was never represented in an economic or even a technological medium. But now there is. If you're a Bitcoiner, you're a Bitcoiner. And if and if I exchange value for value with you, you're my friend and you're my brother or sister. And whether I transact with you all the time, through micropayments or through streaming sats, great. Or if it's once a decade, doesn't matter. There's an understanding. And wow. I think we've only begun to not only understand, but think about what this will do for us. I think it's going to unlock some very interesting new, maybe even net new human behaviors where you do not no longer feel threatened if you feel like you need to duck out or leave for a while. There's a sense of comfort, you can always go home. And many of us, we don't have that, and especially I think the last few years, home is an interesting word, and it's morphed and transmogrified over the years. So I don't know.
What you're describing is a freedom and potential prosperity that comes about as a result of Bitcoin and to another extent Lightning as well. That's a new freedom that potentially has never been around before. Like you said, to leave a community and re-enter without cost to the value left.
And your ability to move in and out of different cultures, whether you know the natural language or not, now, and without geographical limitation. So there's so, when you begin to think about it, bringing the communication layer and the economic layer into a singular medium or experience, which is what I'm trying to do, it makes sense, because every other additional step that distances us from being able to communicate and pass value is a taxation on our time. And I think Bitcoin solves that in a lot of ways. Is it minimizes the taxation of our time. If I want to send John at changing the tides of money, I know your handle, boom. I can just do it, and I don't have to think. I don't have to do any with the right security settings. I can send you that value. I can communicate, and we can just get on with our life. It's just crazy. It's just crazy how much time we waste.
To radical freedom, I think I've gotten 60 to 70% of the way on that thought before, but you just took me the rest of the way. So thank you. The idea of I am not an introvert, as you can probably imagine.
We need people like you.
Onto but the idea too, and I'm not on the spectrum. So as far as communication in real time with people, I maybe have not borne as much of a cost as maybe someone like you, who deals with a different way of interacting with other people, and it's neither good nor bad. It's just different.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm
so
just a
that's
mess. In person, I'm just a mess. I'm just a mess. I'm grateful for the folks in my life who love me for who I am, and and are able to move beyond the strange kind of mechanics of my behavior oftentimes. But I think that's what the internet and what Bitcoin has done is it's given me a boldness to be me, and there is a levity, a freedom that I have not really felt before. So I'm so grateful to be where I am now, that I have economic freedom, true economic freedom, in a way that's wasn't possible even a few years ago. And thank God for Satoshi. I mean, just thank God. I just thank God.
indeed. um, this topic, maybe bringing a little levity to it, it's similar religious faith backgrounds. So there's a lot of people who have reason, the origin of Satoshi, Jesus' second return, or aliens come down and giving us technology, or in a way, someone coming back, time traveling backwards and building something that will prevent the, future destruction of Earth if it anymore. But those are three that I've kind of read and chuckled and actually given significant thought to. Do you ever have you those yet?
Oh yes, I've been meditating. I mean, I have, again, I've shared a little bit, but I have two graduate degrees from Dallas Seminary. It's a Christian theological seminary in Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
And two graduate degrees. And so a huge part of my life, I've worked for large churches and nonprofits in my history, in my past. I love building technology for those folks. And I think Jesus is super cool. What's interesting is that, like, I have been thinking about the relationship and kind of the analogs between Bitcoin and Christ and the church and the Trinity for years. And I have had no one to talk about it with. But the last year, especially in the last year or so, maybe especially in the last 6 months, there has been an absolute growth, like just explosion of interest in the church, in Christian circles, in religious circles kind of generally. And even just the idea of Bitcoin as a religion has just ballooned as an idea. I don't think there's necessarily anything bad with that. I think there's a lot of parallels. But I think it's really cool because it's the right thing to do. What Bitcoin does is it strips away so much of the excess garbage around the way that you think about something so fundamental, which is your time, your energy, and your, in parentheses, economic resources. And that's at some point, as learn to adult, like as we learn to adult here, adulting, hashtag adulting, is we have to understand at some point that our purpose is to maximize our time. And the way that we measure that is through economic output. And that's outside of any kind of religious context, but that's raw materials. That's raw thermodynamic conservation of energy. Like, we're here to transform our world to hopefully to be net positive. That's what I believe, is just, leave it better than when you entered it, kind of as a base level kind of idea. But what Bitcoin does is it forces you to encounter that in a very, very visceral way, a very sobering way. Because, and I know that for everyone who's been in the game for a while, who've gotten to this level of thinking, and when you've been there as long as me, every economic decision, not just purchase on Amazon.com, but every movement of my being, I think, is that the absolute best use of my time? Like, it's crazy. And even how much energy that I'm using to communicate with you is using energy that I've stored within my biological frame, that I converted from raw materials that I ate for lunch, which I purchased with my fiat dollars converted from Bitcoin. And that was, in my effort right now, even talking with you, it's probably worth 5, 6, 7,000 sats. And when you get to that level, you think, wow, God, the spirit, something, math, has given me a way to literally create a relationship between my time and my economical outcome. And once you see that, it's the true orange pill. It's beyond red pill. It's true orange pill. You cannot unsee it. And so as a consequence, every neighboring principle, every neighboring kind of cornerstone ideology has to be then measured against it, which includes, I believe, your faith, your position on faith and religion. And so it is not surprising to me whatsoever that when you encounter Bitcoin, it forces you to go down some sort of religious spiritual track, because you realize there's something at play here. There's something bigger at stake. There's something beyond me that is making this work, and it's nothing more than a gift that I get to decide whether to accept or to deny, to buy into it, so to speak, or to buy a derivative, right, which might be some sort of altcoin or shitcoin, right, a fake religion, or do I go for the real, the true, one true, in Christian parlance, one true God? Do I go towards this pristine asset, or do I go toward derivative? And I'm not here to judge where you land, but how many analogs to the religious spiritual experience can you make? There's an infinite amount. And so it has been nothing short of exciting, my friend, to see people talk very, very plainly in Judeo-Christian terms. There is something here to explore. And I've just been salivating and waiting for people. Like Jimmy Song is, very famously, a Christ follower and stuff. I've had some, back and forth with him, and but he gets it in a different way, but not the way that I think I am seeing it. Like, I see it as a real intimate play, and I cannot unsee it. I don't know if that strikes a chord.
Well, it's very interesting because I just looked up a phrase that you made me think of, and it's in Ephesians 5. Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. Specifically, not necessarily sure what that means theologically at the very end, but that idea of like being wise, making use of your time. And also setting your mind on the things above, kind of to your point of like you just said, what is the highest and best use of my time, my money? What am I going to choose to spend time in with my life? Like you said, your energy. I appreciate that you, when you break it down, I appreciate it that you deemed this podcast, worthy enough of that energy and time.
Well, I did some research. I was thinking, like, this guy, yeah, we share a similar faith background, which is great. So I felt like this is a great place for me to exercise some of these ideas for the very first time in a public way. I don't know, how the folks will respond to it. I'm not sure if I care. But while we're on this, like, let's sit here for a little bit longer, because I don't know if this gets enough play. And I know for some of your listeners, they may not be interested, and that's fine. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the Bible, kind of generally speaking, even if you don't believe in Christ, and what he did on the cross. Really interesting and powerful things about weights and measures. That for those who care about the relationship between us, our faith, and our relationship to money, this could not be a clearer call to action. We see that, like, in Proverbs 20:10, unequal weights and measures are both alike an abomination to the Lord. 11:1, a false balance is an abomination, just as a just weight is his delight. 16:11, a just balance and scales are to the Lord, all the weights in his bag are his work. 16:8, better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice, right? And you time and time again, these very base primitives of life, which is essentially boiled in, and again, just forget the Bible reference for a second. You say it is unfair to have unequal weight and measures. It is not natural to cheat another human in a transaction. It's just not. It's not right. There's nothing right about it. And it should and we all vehemently react the moment we are cheated.
Exactly.
And that is why I think the relationship between Bitcoin and religion and spirituality makes sense, because Bitcoin solves a fundamental injustice. We are born into a world where there are unequal weights and measures. And that should be every day. It is an affront to humanity, right? It's an absolute abomination, whether you're spiritual or not. It's just unfair, and Bitcoin corrects it. And so when so we could sit on that forever. But I've meditated on those passages, and I've always thought when I've read them, but what is the solution? What is the solution? Like, and are we just going to wait around till, and then it arrives, and it arrives in the most, unheralded way. It's incredibly humble beginnings, right? In fact, we don't even know who these people are, right? That's why people call it an immaculate conception. There's something very relatable to that narrative. So I don't know, man. Like, it's just so exciting to live in a time where we can see and experience a fundamental injustice righted. And
Yes.
that is, what a time to be alive.
Yeah. I mean, contextually, again, some listeners may not care, but it might provide some insight, because a lot of people are familiar with Jesus with the whip in days. Well, what he was upset about was that, as close as, to the Jewish people, of that temple was as close as you could get to God, and there were various, depending on whose society. Part of what you were bringing would be in Jerusalem was a sacrifice to the priests, and the closer you got to the temple, and if you were in the charged, not what a pizza is at the airport versus if have changed lately because of inflation, but even 5 years ago, at the airport, 100% versus what you would see at the same restaurant, like out on the street. They were doing to one of the most important things that people could do at that time, which is to, and in the same way, very that some of the adoption is happening, it was impacting the poorest people, who were coming to, and it pissed you. Anyway, it's very fascinating that, with El Salvador, which in money terms was a state of the United States Reserve, specifically because they're dollarized, Bitcoin is legal tender. And that, to me, is another one of these interesting connection points for me. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Really, we could spend, I've done some fairly intense studies of the temple literature, and goes so beyond. That particular example of Jesus coming in and just breaking skulls is awesome. And it's grossly misunderstood because, most people are like, well, is that exception? They missed the point entirely. The point is plain as day. It's unequal in measure. Just as you said, Jesus saw what was plainly happening was money was changing hands. In fact, the church and the temple at the time actually acted as the local bank. It actually acted as a lender of credit and of debt. And actually, when you went to deposit and make these calls, you would actually move into the inner sanctums. You would actually the place of deposit would actually be farther into the temple. Architecturally, we see this, and so essentially, you were buying closer proximity to the altar, right, or to our God.
Wow.
And the more you could afford, the closer those depositories would be. And so, but as a consequence, as we know, if you cannot afford, you could only afford an outer, to make a donation or a sacrifice to the outer walls. So you were still outside the curtain. You didn't have access. And Jesus saw this and said, unequal weights and measures, right? My grace was given freely to all men of all stature, of all time, equally, with no payment required. And you are, there's a heavier taxation on the poor than the rich. And so even outside of a messianic narrative, every single person can appreciate the idea of being cheated and being so plain. Like literally, the sign on the wall of some of these synagogues was the pricing, and so you knew that you could not buy your salvation, but maybe in time you could crazy. One more story, just from kind of this will help educate some folks. In Hebrew culture, every 7 years, this was the year of Jubilee, so debts would get forgiven. This unbelievable cultural phenomena, which still happens in some parts of our world. But every 7 years, this debt forgiveness, the year of Jubilee, a fantastic kind of resetting. And so it's interesting to hear folks talk about the Great Reset. There's obviously precedent for that.
Yes.
But every 7 years. But what the temple would do, and what the more wealthy folks would do in those periods of times, is they would sell. So you say you're a farmer and you owed someone else some value, right? But you knew that, hey, it's year 6 and I owe you 100 shekels or 100 bushels of wheat. But in year 7, you're going to forgive me that based on our culture, based on our religion, our dogma, right? And so the interesting incentive system, right? So if I can just push this loan out to year 7, it gets neutralized. Well, as the person servicing the credit and the debt, there's an interesting incentive where if you could sell the debt to the temple, you could somehow skip the year of Jubilee. And so this could only happen if you were super poor, because you didn't have any, essentially it was a margin call. And so now, instead of getting your debt forgiven, culturally, economically, everything, you now owed the temple a tax. And there was no end to that one. There wasn't any Jubilee contract with the temple. And so it was an infinite hamster wheel for the poor. and you would sell it, and you would sell it through the temple. And so when Jesus came with a whip, he was saying, I'm cleaning house because this is beyond corrupt. This is beyond corrupt. You're literally taking people's lives because they will never overcome the debt that sits here. And it's such a powerful thing when you really understand the kind of the text and what the cultural and the phenomena that was like. It was so much injustice, and so you almost then it tempers the way that you feel about Christ's reaction, because you're like, well, that would make me pretty pissed off too.
Yeah,
Interesting, right?
very much so. Very much so. Which, is just part of the reason I have been drawn to Bitcoin, because of many of these parallels. Um, and people
But
don't
one step
find me.
farther,
Sure.
volatility. I know, and this is crazy. I've been thinking about this for the
Hey, this
volatility for a lot of folks.
8-bit, so you are
I
like,
know this is so
we're
crazy.
just
People are
diving
being
deep,
like,
man.
this is so. But when you think about it, tactically, the high volatility, right? Bitcoin is high vol. You're shorting, you're longing volatility, you're shorting credit here. But the volatility and its up and down sequences is essentially a mathematical debt forgiveness cycle. And if you time it right, and this is, I don't want to necessarily talk about trading too much here, but it provides this natural onboard and an egress points of onboarding and leaving the system, where you can, if you can time it right. And personally, from a personal, just my personal story, Bitcoin helped me get out of debt. So I had nothing but gratitude for the high volatility. Like, it's a feature, not a bug. And I see some interesting parallels between, the year of Jubilee and this kind of the cyclical, repeatable, event, and what we see with an interesting mathematical technology.
It's like, for the most part, it's been about a 4-year cycle. So they say it could be a 7-year cycle. We would only of those cycles to go off if
Yeah,
it
yeah,
were
it's
7
typically a
years.
4. But I'm not saying that's
Yeah.
equal to 7. Yeah, but there's some interesting relationships. Like, that's what's so amazing about it.
Yeah.
You could spend all day meditating and finding the strings and the attachments.
Yeah. We could keep that now officially in my recording. So it's not only a and I thing has been jam packed 8-bit. I want to make sure, like, if there's anything else you want to talk about, give you let you your time out. Would you like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just grateful to have this conversation. I'm really excited about this year. I'm very excited about to see what everyone will be building this year. This is the year. Please, 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 please. If you're in this industry, Bitcoiner, this is the year to build. Like, this is not to necessarily build your wealth, although I think that will be a natural consequence. But there's nothing unwise about building for an economy that is coming and that will be profitable. There is nothing unwise about that. So if there is anything entrepreneurial in you, you should be thinking about, what can I build? How can I help bring this interesting economy to bear? I don't necessarily feel like we have to accelerate it by our own hands. It will grow at its own pace. So I'm not about like growth at all costs, but I am interested in seeing this and being a more important part of it. And I think everyone has an opportunity to do that. So, Bitcoin email is just my small personal attempt to contribute something back meaningfully to the larger economy. But I know there's some much bigger projects that folks are working on, and I'm really excited to see what those are too. So thank you so much for letting me hang out.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, you know what? I sent you in the community forum a question. Feel free to answer as much as or as little as you want, but One of the interesting things that came about recently, and I think it started at Zebedee, like a Lightning address. Um, and so it sounds like one of the differences is going to be that this isn't only going to be for Lightning Network, not email, but specifically starting more at the core level. Um,
Yes.
and is there anything else that you feel like is interesting those might interplay?
Oh, I mean, there's so many things, but one of the coolest things, and I'm just gonna, this will leave a lot of folks salivating, I think, is there has never been a real way to resell an account, because it's always been blocked by terms of service or by the economic layer. And so as a result, there's always, as any new network that comes up, there's always been an interesting black market or secondary market for accounts. But you always have to go outside. You have to go sell your account on eBay or something else. Like, for instance, I get pinged every year by multiple video game companies to see if I'm willing to sell my Twitter account at 8-bit, obviously. And I've gotten six figures offers for it. I've said no to everything. And it's not because I don't want the money. That would be great. It's because I'm legally not allowed to sell my account. I cannot sell that, or we both lose out and we break the term of service. But for the first time ever in a Bitcoin standard world, everything essentially has digital value. And so for the first time ever in kind of the Bitcoin email world, if you have Jon, Jon at btc.email, you can sell that to someone. It is a real utility. It's not a fake utility like a lot of the Ethereum, or shitcoin projects. It's actually a real underlying utility. And so if you buy it if you use it and then sell it to someone else because you just don't want to use it, it's a vanity email, you can. You can sell it for whatever you want, for any amount of sats or Bitcoin. I can see some folks actually using their account for a long time and then selling it later. So in an interesting way, it's a true use of a digital utility, kind of I don't know. It's just it is something I've wanted to do. Create an account like on World of Warcraft, sell it on eBay, which I've done many times, for cash, and do it on the legal, do it on the legit. But you can't. But in a Bitcoin standard world, and in a Bitcoin denominated world, every time you purchase something in, I think, the new economy, it has intrinsic value to itself, not an NFT style. That's not what we're talking about. Not a JPEG, but actual utility. And so I think it'll be really cool for folks to sign up for the system, for it to, to grow a little bit. And then for folks to realize, like, hey, I have a bunch of these accounts. I'm not interested in using them, and I could sell them. So it's some interesting behaviors I think we can unlock and create a marketplace for folks. I think that's going to be really fun, because for us to be able to exchange value and do it frictionless and free, like you never know what's going to happen as a result. So, but being able to buy and sell the underlying tool is something that you just can't do in Web 1, Web 2 systems. It just breaks terms of service, breaks all legalities. But in the way that I'm thinking about it, it's like, no, you can not only pass value and content, emails back and forth. You could sell the underlying account, attach it to a different wallet address, and off you go. Think about inheritance, right? That's a big deal. Is like, I want to be able to give my kids my wallet addresses when I die, which has all this Bitcoin in it, right? Why shouldn't I be able to do that also with every other digital asset that I have, including my emails? Like, Bitcoin changes the way that you think about everything, right?
Huh. Yep.
Like, I've spent 14, now 15 years in Gmail's ecosystem. I'm ready to go. Given them hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over the years, right? And when I leave that system, think about this. When I leave that system, I get nothing. I leave with nothing. Nothing. Yep. That's what Bitcoin solves, is that your time should be stored infinitely and be retrievable in a usable form, in a fungible format for future use. That's what Bitcoin solves. And I think there's going to be an entirely new economy based on true reuse of technological goods, which should save the planet. Just kidding. Just kidding. Got to get that ESG comment in there. Just kidding. ESG. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, right. Oh man. Well, so 8-bit, just as kind of a parting, comment, I'd love for you to be able to plug away where people can find whatever you want them to find in your new NIM existence. Where can they find you in your project?
Yeah, I think just I'm at 8bit, 8, the number BIT, just like it sounds, on Twitter, and that's really it. Yeah, that's really it. You just go there.
Cool.
There is something very freeing about being a NIM, and it's not, again, not prescribing anything, but there's pros and cons. There's definitely pros and cons, and I like it on this side though.
Well, I might have to give it a try. Well,
At the
thanks so
right
much
time.
for, yeah, at the right time. Thanks for joining today, 8-bit, and excited to continue to follow along on the btc.email project and just continue the conversation.
You've been great. Thank you so much, and God bless. Thanks everyone for listening.
Yes. All right.